Welcome everyone to another AZ Ray video. Today we're going to talk about 28 years later. Before we get into it, what I want to tell you guys right off the bat is no, you do not have to watch any of the other films like 28 days later, 28 weeks later to understand this film. You can just go straight into it. The director, Danny Boyle, and the writer did a great job of setting up this film. So if you're completely new, you can just jump right into it. If you want to have a better background of the whole rage disease and the affected, you're welcome to watch the other ones, but it's not mandatory. All right, guys. So the way we're going to break this down is that we're going to talk about disease, horrors of humanity, talk about like nihilism a little bit, and then we're just going to wrap up the film review and the conclusion. And the reason why we're talking about diseases, right? Because you may think, why don't you want to do a little bit of like anthropology and history breakdown of zombies? But this actually isn't a zombie movie. It's a movie about disease and how we react to disease. None of the movies are actually about zombies. They're about diseases. So if I explain to you the horrors and the tragedies and all the things that we deal with when it comes to diseases, I think it will give you a better idea of how that also plays a role into this film. So what I want to talk about right now in this section is just about diseases. But like always, before I get into it, guys, we have timestamps on the bottom. You can always skip around and yeah, choose your own journey how you want to watch this video. So diseases. So diseases have been around since we've been around. We have viruses, bacteria, and cells, and we coexist together. And as we survived and improved various things throughout our lives, it's also improved our awareness for diseases. But some improvements come with some trade-offs, right? So what I want to talk about a little bit too is some of the way diseases are transported about us, because you're probably wondering, why aren't you guys talking about zombies? This is technically not a zombie movie. Although it has similar themes and similar makeups of how the things are presented, this is technically a film about disease. So one of the two main ways that disease get affected from us is through the various forms of exposure. It's actually through our livestock and like our food consumption and transportation. So the way food affects us is because our dependency on farming livestock, such as cows, birds, and even the connection between bats, because bats share a connection between cows and birds. Bats can even potentially provide a solution how we can combat and survive various diseases as well. So our dependency on animals and livestock have also affected diseases and our exposure to them today. In this next section, we're going to break down a little bit about how transportation has been both the strength and a curse, because as we improve through technology, through having cities and through having ways to transport, it's provided concentrated areas for diseases to stay, but has also provided transportation for diseases to spread all over the place, right? And COVID is an easy example how you guys can have an idea on how that works. The thing about diseases too is that people often think that diseases are more affected depending on different genders, social classes, economic classes, but it actually doesn't affect how we combat them. One of the biggest things that help us overpower and survive against diseases is actually support systems. So who you have around you plays a big role when it comes to your emotional, neurological, as well as your health and the way you can like better survive. Whether you like it or not, as humans, we work better as people working in communities, and our communities is what's allowed us to thrive and survive through various eras throughout humanity. So our communities is actually what helps us, makes us stronger, and actually helps us combat diseases as well. To break down a disease that I think perfectly exemplifies the film 28 years later, we're going to talk about smallpox. Smallpox was also known as Cocoliztli in Nahuatl, known as the Great Dying. We have two different depictions of two different perspectives of how this disease was interpreted during the Spanish conquest of the Americas, otherwise known as Abya, Yala. And these regions of the world in the Americas, we have the Spanish point of view, which has the very traditional Christian Catholic ideology of fire and brimstone, the idea that, this was some kind of great plague that was uh, killing those that are impure and affecting them. When we have the other side of it, the Nahuatl saw this disease as an infection that was based on a plague of uncleanliness. The smallpox epidemic and although otherwise known as the Cocoliztli, was happening from the 1520s all the way to the late 1570s. And so the reason why I want to bring this up is that not only because I'm Mexican, no, that doesn't have to do with it, maybe a little bit, but it also is the fact that we have a disease that's rampaging these various areas, that it's affecting both sides, but it's also a conquest. So it's a war, which is very similar to the plot that we have in the 28 years later. The toll about how many people were affected around this time was a huge population landslide. It is approximated to be around 17 million people affected. Now, this section, we're just going to very briefly talk about iodine, because iodine is very important, a very simple, essential mineral that we need for human survival, and it allows us to thrive. And it helps us, especially when it comes to things like our immune system, our metabolism, and brain development, which is very crucial in these times, because a lot of people, at least for the main central part of this film, they're brought into a more simpler time when they have to be more dependent on the resources around them, and they have to thrive into their environment. So we're kind of in like early community stages of the world, similar to like the early 1100s, 1300s, 1500s, little small communities. So little things like iodine become incredibly crucial. So now we're going to talk about a little bit more about the film section. So now that we stop being anthropological and analyzing the history and the various mechanism and how disease can affect us, I gave you a direct example of how disease can be like horrific and also be mixed with some kind of warfare, right? I know most of you watching this probably experienced COVID as well too, and you guys have some kind of other connections with other diseases. It could be like AIDS, cancer. Disease alone already plays a role and affects us through everyday life. But then you have warfare. And then when you have humans versus humans in this kind of world scenario, it brings down an extra layer, because everyone's trying to fight for survival, and they're also combating against diseases for survival. So that's what brings us into this next section, which is the horrors of humanity. People in this film, they're dying to live. They're just scraping and getting by. And just like I mentioned earlier, they're succeeding to some extent due to their support systems and their communities. And that's allowing them to thrive forward. And what's allowing them to coexist is the idea of rituals and assigned roles. Since I'm doing this from the top of my memory, some of the roles that were emphasized in the film were farmers, nurses, fishermen and women. We have some kind of soldiers, guard posts, and hunters. All these various people did their best to try to make this system work, to make sure people were thriving as farmers, hunter-gatherers, and foragers to get the resources they needed to survive. All these rituals and roles were done to normalize everyday life. And people would even use traditional escapes like they were in modern times, such as drinking, sex, just so they could feel something, so they could escape, so they can get some sense of normalcy, even though they had to deal with the harms of reality in this everyday nightmare. This community in Holy Land in England is an island, so it's always in constant threats. So they have to be very selective on who they let in and who they let out, and they have very strict rules. Because, as we stated, this isn't your traditional zombie-like movie. It's more centered around diseases and how they're doing their best to survive these various infected people that have this rage-like disease, right? And we see how those people have even evolved in their own sense, because humanity has a habit of evolving in communities, no matter how we see those things interact. So we see the people in Holy Land also interact with, as I stated, rituals, different roles, and we also see other forms of like patriotism that also helps them play a role and be empowerment. And then the director does a good job of kind of showing us all the various timelines and how like some as much as we advance, we're kind of not that different. That humanity has this sense of like tendencies and how we respond to these very stressful and chaotic situations. So that's what becomes the horror of humanity, because like we forget how hard it is to live once we remove all our outside resources, right? We have like everyday predators, and when your predator is potentially an everyday man that is gassed up on this crazy rage disease, it kind of makes you reevaluate and reappreciate all the things that we've overcome. Now we're gonna go into our section of nihilism before we close it out with the review and our final thoughts. So, nihilism, it's the idea of hopelessness and what's the point of doing anything, right? We see various characters throughout the story that are kind of having this feeling of like hopelessness, and they try to find different forms of escapism to battle through all the tragedies that are happening, right? We even have these people that are making up these like stories or folklore of things to try to rationalize their environment, even making rumors of other people. And this all becomes a symptom of nihilism, right? Because no matter what they do, as much as they try to progress and be better in this circumstance, it seems to be like this endless chain, right? And because people are torn and forced to deal with different things, nihilism becomes something that they deal with. And it's something that we can relate to as a person in everyday life, whether we're experiencing everyday burnout or just someone who's overwhelmed and stressed with their lives. Yes, there is some communities that are still thriving on religion and other sections that have their own form of cult-like behaviors. But either way, all these sections, whether you're completely nihilist or whether you're something more on the religious side, you're still trying to combat nihilism. Either you're dealing with it or nihilism is defeating you, right? And sometimes diseases or sicknesses themselves also affect you in your nihilism. So that's another layer to it. And because you don't have access to various resources, it becomes harder for you to deal with everyday life, because just imagine these people just like starting from the very bottom of regular society. And I know I'm kind of being a little vague, but I'm purposely making this spoiler free so you can enjoy this and get some value from it. Okay. So now we're going to get to our review. So the review section, it was hard for me to go back and forth. I was flirting with an 8 and a 7.9, but I think I'm going to have to stick on the 7.9. It was close to an 8. The film was very enjoyable. It was the beginning of a good story, but there was parts of it where I felt like it wasn't necessary to show. But I'm confident that maybe the sequel, or if there is a third one, I believe there is going to be a trilogy. I think that's going to do a better job of overlapping the story. It's a great start. It's very interesting. I think a lot of people can get a lot of value from it, and it can actually allow you to like reflect and appreciate the things that we have in life and whatnot, and how humanity responds to like chaotic situations and how scary human is. You know what I mean? And the horrors of humanity, like I've been emphasizing in this video. So it's a 7.9. I highly recommend it. 7.9 by any means is not a bad score. I promise you, it's a great score, or it's a good score. But definitely check. If you're curious, it's going to be worth it. You're going to laugh. I know. Yep. You're going to laugh. You're going to enjoy yourself, and you're going to have a good ride. So thank you so much for checking out this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the notification bells, leave a comment below. Hope you enjoy this. Share this to your mama, your papa, your sister, your brother. Share it to whoever. Spread the word. We're on our race to 500 subscribers. Come on, guys. We can do this. All right, guys. Take it easy. It's been your breakdown with me from A to Z.